So I'll go on ahead and get started. And I want to welcome everybody. I'm Chuck Chase, and I'm just cat a corner from all of you over there at the Department of Natural Resources. So we probably shared an elevator before or something like that. This is my I love me slide, but it's to tell you who I am and why I have any qualifications to tell you about the things I'm telling you now. I am a certified floodplain manager. I got my master's degree in quality systems management. So management systems, that's that whole thing that we're all doing, you know, the Lean Six and Six Sigma and lean manufacturing, that kind of thing. That's what my master's is in. I've got my bachelor's degree in education from Peru State College. Go Bobcats. Also a bachelor's in mathematics there. And I am the outreach coordinator for the Department of Natural Resources. So that's me. And somehow or other, oh, here we go. There we go. So Amber is going to go ahead and mute everybody during this presentation, and that'll help the background noise. So go ahead and use the chat to ask questions during the presentation. We will pause for questions at the end, but you know how it is. If you don't type it down when you're thinking about it, you might not remember at the end. So she'll capture that. So use that chat. Seeing your face is typically nice, but I'm not really looking over at that. So, you know, I see that most of you aren't using your cameras, and that's absolutely fine. If you have any technical difficulties, go on ahead and send a private chat message to Amber Ward, or if you lose connection at, you know, whatever, you can't even send a chat, go on ahead and shoot her an email, you know, amber.ward@nebraska.gov. You guys probably already all have her on your contacts list anyway. So, and that's about it. I've got other things there, but they're for other presentations. So the National Flood Insurance Program is what I'm talking to you about, and communities all throughout Nebraska participate in it. The state of Nebraska participates in it. And so the question is, you know, why? Well, if a structure is mapped into a floodplain, then flood insurance must be purchased in order to obtain a federally backed mortgage. So a lot of these communities that have houses that are already existing in the floodplain, they need to participate in this program so that people can get loans on these houses. Otherwise, without a federally backed, no bank gives out loans with their own cash. You know, they're using Freddie Mac and that kind of stuff, you know. So they're federally backed mortgages, and so that they have to have this in order for them to give out a loan. Furthermore, there could be implications for disaster assistance if there's a flood map and the community doesn't participate. This happened just recently where there was a Nebraska organization that said, hey, we're not really a Nebraska department, but we're not really a part of the county either, so we don't have to follow floodplain rules. And so we're just going to build however we feel. And my comment to them is, well, that's fine, but you probably have $3.5 million worth of disaster grants that are right now on the table because the 2019 floods, and you won't qualify for them because you're not in good standing with the National Flood Insurance Program if you're not a part of the county and if you're not a part of the state. Now, that doesn't apply to you guys. You guys are a part of the state, and so certainly you qualify. State entities do qualify. But the big reason that people communicate really is because it does reduce the loss of life and the loss of property due to flooding. So the authority. So I'm gonna have some very wordy slides come on up, and that's okay. You don't need to read them. You don't need to memorize them. I've got the sentences highlighted that we want to focus on, but they all come from the Nebraska Revised Statutes, Chapter 31, Article 10, floodplain. Amber, I am going to give you this slide bank so you can go ahead and share it with everybody so that they can use it for notes later and the like. So if you want to read that, or you can just go diagonally across the hall and ask one of our ladies at the front desk, and they'll just go on back and give you a copy of this out of our cupboard. Also, the state minimum standards for floodplain management, which is Nebraska Administrative Code Title 455. And this is pretty much what all the different communities use as a basis for creating their own ordinance for their own community. So this is very much like their ordinance. And if they're not participating, then essentially this is the ordinance that you'll use when you build or when you're doing projects with economic development projects. The other statute, by the way, says that if they are participating, that state departments will go on ahead and follow the local ordinance. So, and here's where it says that kind of stuff. By the way, the State Emergency Operation Plan states that rates flooding as the disaster of highest risk in Nebraska. So as a state, it's important that we stay in good standing with National Flood Insurance Program so that flood insurance is available to local communities and available to us. That's a good point. You can, as a department, you can buy flood insurance for any projects that you're working on, any structures that you're building or the like, because you are, as a part of the state, in good standing with the National Flood Insurance Program. And here's where it says it, that we assure that the state departments are eligible for flood insurance. So the Nebraska Department of Natural Resources, we have a floodplain management section, and our mission is to prevent loss of life and property due to flooding. And we do that through wise management of development in the state. And we'll make maps. We'll administer flood mitigation assistance grants. But the bottom line is that we can give you technical assistance that you need when you're working around the floodplain. We provide a lot of technical assistance to the local floodplain administrators, technical assistance with technical facts about the floodplain, including the floodwater elevations. That's called the base flood elevation. We review their ordinance to make sure that their program is in total compliance with federal standards. We provide training and help implement their programs. Oops, not too far. There we go. And then that second sentence there points out the fact that our department, we don't really run the floodplain program. We kind of do for state departments such as yourself, if there's not a local program in place, if the local community isn't participating. But floodplain management is implemented at the local level. They can and often do have higher standards than what was in our minimum standards guide there. So when you're doing a program, when you're doing some sort of development, you should work closely with a local floodplain administrator as you develop in their community. They'll let you know exactly what's required and what needs to take place in order to do development in the floodplain. Now, if the jurisdiction is in the National Flood Insurance, you'll need to comply with their standards, which, like we say, might be higher than the state's. So work with their floodplain administrators. The point is here that you don't have to be experts in floodplain regulations or implementations. They should be able to let you know what is required in their jurisdiction. Now, if the community is not in the flood insurance program as a state entity, you still need to follow our state minimum standards, as we spoke about earlier. In that case, call the Department of Natural Resources and we'll help you with the compliance. So you still don't have to be experts. You can give us a call. So the bottom line is, whether a permit is provided by the local jurisdiction or by the state, a permit is always required for development in the floodplain. And what do we mean by development? Well, this is how FEMA defines development. Any man-made change or improved or unimproved real estate, including but not limited to buildings or other structures, mining, dredging, filling, grading, paving, excavation, drilling operations, storage of equipment or even materials. All of that's development. So as you can see, that pretty much covers everything you would do in the floodplain. So it's very broad. Now, for the state, we don't talk so much about development. We talk about obstructions. But it's pretty much the same thing. An obstruction shall mean any wall, wharf, embankment, levee, dike, pile, abutment, projection, excavation, including the alteration or relocation of a watercourse or drainway, channel rectification, a bridge, a conduit, a culvert, a building, stored equipment or materials, wire, fence, gravel, rock. So gravel, rock. So again, we're talking about even paving a driveway or something like that. Refuse, fill, any other analogous structure or matter which may impede, retard, or change the direction of the flow of water, either in itself or by catching or collecting debris carried by such water, or that place where the natural flow of the water would carry such a structure or matter downstream to the damage or detriment of either life or property. So in one of our communities, there was somebody that got a great deal evidently on railroad ties, and they just got a ton of railroad ties and they piled them on their property, which was right next to the Blue River and just upstream of the brand new highway bridge that they put in their community. I don't want to tell you which community it is, but the point is that if there was a flood, all of those railroad ties would get washed away and potentially clog up underneath that bridge and wipe that bridge out. I mean, they'd pile up. We see that even with like mobile homes and stuff like that. Anyone who's done any boating along the river, you know how many mobile homes there are right along the banks of the Missouri or the Elkhorn or whatever. They've got whole communities of them. And if those aren't anchored down, they go buoyant, and they'll wipe out some bridges. So even storing material is something that needs a permit. And the reason for a permit there is the guys, whoever, the floodplain administrator, guy or male or female, whatever, the floodplain administrator is going to say, yeah, you can store them here, but we need them to be anchored down to prevent flotation, that kind of thing. Same kind of thing when you're looking at burying pipe or cable. It's like, why would you need a permit for that? It's going to be underground. It's not going to impede any kind of water or whatever. And you're right, it's not going to impede the flood. If they give a permit that says once this pipe is buried, you'll return the ground to its original state. And that's why they need to have a permit for something like that, is because otherwise they'll say, yeah, go ahead and bury your pipe there. And they'll come back and there'll be a trench with a couple of piles of dirt on the side. And they'll say, well, nobody told us we had to, bury it again once we put this pipe in. So, it's that kind of stuff, just making sure that they return everything to its original grade if they're burying pipe, or if they're digging a well, to make sure that the well is built in such a way that it prevents flood water, which is notoriously, we'll just say icky, from getting into the groundwater. And we want to prevent cross-contamination, that kind of thing. So as you can see, development includes construction, maintenance, restoration, preservation, rehabilitation, additions or modifications to existing structure, grading, filling, any of that kind of stuff. So typically an engineer will show that the effect of the development and what kind of rise it would cause. We're going to be talking a little bit about the floodway. But in the floodplain, development cannot increase the water surface elevation of the flood water an unacceptable amount. Now, you'll hear people say it can't cause more than a foot of rise, and that's true. If it's more than a foot, that's considered unacceptable. But a local floodplain administrator might look at a 6-inch rise and say, because there's a house right next door that's not in the floodplain, but is sitting in some low-lying ground, we don't want you to increase the floodwaters 6 inches or 3 inches, maybe, you know. So they can still say that's an unacceptable rise for me for this area, you know. So a 1 foot rise is always unacceptable. Now, in a floodway, you can't cause any rise at all, and no structures for human habitation in the floodway. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. Tom asked me to go into some more detail about making maps and looking at maps and stuff. So I appreciate that. And as I go over all of these regulations and things like that, I don't want you guys to worry, because if you're doing development and if you have questions, go ahead and give me a call. There's my number, 471-9422. You can call me anytime and just say, hey, you know, I just want to bounce this off of you. We're doing this project here, and doesn't look like it's in the floodplain, but it's awfully close, you know, or whatever, you know, and we'll look at possible solutions. So again, technical assistance, you know, that's what I do. That's probably 50% of my job anyway. So whether the jurisdiction has floodplain regulations or not, you'll still need to comply. And therefore, it's important to develop procedures to ensure that you are either working with the local floodplain administrator or with Department of Natural Resources in order to comply. So we'll give you all the technical assistance you need, but again, you should be looking at developing procedures to make sure that if you are doing some development, that you know how to go ahead and contact the local floodplain administrator, get the permit, that you get the floodplain development permit, you know, or contact us if not. So we're going to start getting really into this. And so, of course, there are terms that we need to discuss. There's always terms, and this is a federal program. You guys work with federal programs, so you know what that's like. I want to say that that this is going to be an AFZ, which is an acronym-free zone. Little joke there, little joke. Anyway, but the fact is, you know, we all know this. There's just acronyms that you kind of have to know when you're working with a certain program. I'll try and say base flood elevation all the time, but a lot of times we'll say BFE because we're talking about base flood elevations a lot. So we oftentimes refer to that as the BFE. I'll talk about flood maps, so you know what I'm talking about, but flood maps are actually called FIRMs. Well, they're not actually called FIRMs either. They're called flood insurance rate maps, and we call them FIRMs because that's the acronym. So when we're talking about a flood map, we're typically talking about a FIRM, and that's an acronym for flood insurance rate map. I don't think I'm ever going to say the FPA for a community. I'll say floodplain administrator. That's an acronym that you'll often see written. And the National Flood Insurance Program, I'll frequently call that the NFIP. So, so if you hear me say that, you know, either stop me or just understand the NFIP is the National Flood Insurance Program. SFHA, I usually just say the floodplain. You know, you guys understand what I'm talking about when I'm saying the floodplain. Floodplain probably isn't the right term to use, but that's what I'll end up using. And I'm going to get into some terms like floodplain here in a second. I don't know if you'll find this entertaining or not. It's probably just a little confusing. But if you see SFHA, they're talking about the regulatory floodplain. And let's get into some other terms because, like I said, this may be confusing, but unfortunately, there are often multiple terms in this program that mean the same thing. So when we're talking about a regulatory flood, we call it the 100%, the 100-year flood, or we might call it the 1% chance flood. We might even call it the base flood. And so the question might come up, well, why don't you just pick one and use that term instead of bouncing back and forth between all three? Well, there's a thing called the flood insurance study. And in the flood insurance study, they call it the 1% chance flood. And on the firm, on the flood insurance rate map, they call it the 100-year flood. And in regs, it may be referred to something different altogether. The elevation of the waters of the 1% chance flood is called the elevation of the base flood, or the base flood elevation, which we just mentioned a second ago, the BFE, the base flood elevation, which is the elevation of the 100-year flood. It's the 100-year flood level, or it's the 1% chance flood level. And to continue on, we talked about the special flood hazard area already. And you'll oftentimes hear that referred to as the 100-year floodplain. Is your house in the 100-year floodplain? Is it not in the 100-year floodplain? Is it in the 1% chance floodplain? And the reason there's a confusion there between those two is that frequently, or what people say is that if we call it the 100-year flood plain and they got flooded this year, then oftentimes people feel like, well, it'll be 99 years before we get another flood like that. Well, 1% chance is a 1% chance every year. Every year you've got a 1% chance of your house flooding if it's in this floodplain. So they would like to move to that 1% chance, but again, you're still going to see it on the maps and the like, referred to as the 100-year floodplain. Or they might call it the base floodplain or the regulatory floodplain. So when we talk about the floodplain, or when I use the term floodplain, actually what I should be referring to is the regulatory floodplain. But if you guys would just forgive me, the only floodplain I'm really going to be talking about is the regulatory floodplain. You see, there could be like a 50-year floodplain, or there could be a 0.2% chance floodplain identified. The base is the 1%, or the 100-year, or the, you get the idea. So with all of this, this is the elevation that you're going to regulate to. So it's the regulatory floodplain. Well, we continually make and update flood maps in an effort to accurately identify flood hazards. And so there's always mapping going on. And Tom asked me earlier, he said there's some projects that you guys are doing where new maps are potentially coming out. And he said, how long would that be? Well, I'm not going to go into too much detail on this over wordy slide here, but there are all sorts of different phases that the map is going to go through. First, we go through a discovery process where we look over an area and find out whether we need to be making new maps for this area or not. So we look at historic flood-related data, we collect information, we talk to the communities and the like to see whether new flood maps are going to be necessary or not. Then we go into a phase of data development, and we get all this data, and we have a variety of community meetings that we're involved with when we do that. And then at some point, those maps become preliminary. And when they become preliminary, that means that has a special meaning. That means that like in 6 months, in 3 months, whatever that time frame is, that this map is going to be the map. It's not set in stone yet, but what we're saying is the concrete is poured and it's going to be setting up over the next few months. So during it's so that they have that 6-month period for a community to say, hey, wait a minute, you never contacted me and got my feedback early on. Stop the train, you know, or hey, on this map, you've left out a whole city or something like that. They have to have some pretty solid engineering data in order to stop the train once a map has gone preliminary, but it gives them that time to go on ahead and make a comment if there is something, you know, that, you know, there is some kind of smoking gun like that or something along that line. So really the process takes about 5 years from start to finish. Now, once we've decided that the maps are going to be made, by that time we're looking at probably about a 3-year process to make the maps, get them reviewed, make edits. You know, each one of these, there's going to be like a 6-month time frame where people can make comments and the like. So it takes a while. If you've got some new maps coming out for an area where you have a project, then go ahead and contact our office. I would say contact me, but I don't have any idea. I would just go ahead and patch it through to one of the engineers that know. But Katie or any of our engineers could probably tell you what the expected timeline is. Of course, things can get in the way. I know that you have questions about the Elkhorn River. Well, we were probably 70% through the Elkhorn River project when the flood hit. And with several of the other projects, we were 75% through with them too, and we're continuing on with them. But with the Elkhorn, that river just isn't in the same place it was anymore. It's silly for us to go on ahead and use the data that we had if the Elkhorn has, you know, moved 300 yards one direction or another, you know, and it has. It's gone through whole, subdivisions and the like. So the Elkhorn has just moved. So we're kind of starting from scratch with that. This is not the latest and greatest slide about where we have projects in the state, but I'll show you where you can find where we have projects. And this is fairly recent, October a year ago. So some of this has changed a little bit. But as you can see, quite a bit of the state has mapping projects going on currently. So what does it mean to you? Well, it's always a good idea to check with your local floodplain administrator or with the Department of Natural Resources to see if new maps are on the horizon and to see if new maps may affect your development. You may find that the area that you're doing some development or have a project in is not in the floodplain currently, but will be potentially 2 years from now. Now, from what Tom said, that might be a situation where you're like, we need to hurry on this because once it's put in the floodplain, HUD won't allow us to continue moving forward with this community development project, you know? So that might put the rush on it. With other things, you might look at it and say, well, look, this isn't in the floodplain right now, but it's going to be in 2 years, and we don't want to have an ongoing project in the floodplain. So we're gonna put the kibosh on it right now, you know. With other things, you might look at something and say, well, this isn't in the floodplain, but we've got new maps coming out, and it won't be in the floodplain when the new maps are in effect. So maybe we can work on this, but maybe we can work on it a little bit slower and wait for these new maps to catch up with us. You know, whatever the case may be, it's always a good idea to check with the local floodplain administrator and or check with our office. So what do these maps look like? Most of you have probably seen them from what Tom said, but this is kind of what the paper maps look like when they come on out. And what you'll see here is all that area that's in blue or aqua, whatever, you know, that's the floodplain. This is a community, Scribner, as a matter of fact, that has levees all around the community. You can see Scribner there has this levee system surrounding it, and they've got floodwaters on both sides. The Elkhorn's coming down one side. I don't know what the river is to the south of them, but the two together really form quite a big floodplain in there. When you're looking at these maps, there are different zones that you'll find on there, and each zone has its own meaning. And I'm not going to get into all the zones. There aren't that many really, but the two that you'll typically see are Zone A. Now, what you see here with this is it's just this blue area, and that's all that you kind of see is just the blue. And for most of the state, that's good enough. It just says, here's where the floodplain is. You know, it's in this area. And in this particular case, with this little piece of a map that I've got here, it looks like it's pretty easy to avoid it. If you were looking at building in this area, you could just build 20 feet, 30 feet to the east or to the west and avoid the floodplain altogether and continue on with your project. And so that's good enough. But all regulatory floodplains in Nebraska begin with the letter A. So an A is just a basic floodplain. Zone A is just basic floodplain. There are other floodplains that start with the letter V, but those are coastal floodplains, and we don't have any coast here in Nebraska, so you'll never see those anywhere in our state. Anything in the state of Nebraska that starts with the letter A, it's a floodplain. Now, the other common floodplain in Nebraska is an AE zone, and as you look at this, you'll see there's a lot of different sections to it. There's a lot of cross sections, a lot of lines going through it. An AE zone, you can calculate the base flood elevation to the 1/10 of a foot using cross sections that you see here, and using something called flood insurance study. And so in the back of the flood insurance study, there are some graphs where you can interpolate between these cross sections, and a surveyor can go on ahead and tell you what the base flood elevation is to the 1/10 of a foot. The flood insurance study also contains information on velocity of flood waters, other technical information on the floodplain. Typically in Nebraska, if we have an AE zone and we're doing all this study, we will also establish a floodway. And you can see a floodway in this thing. I think you guys can see my cursor, but right there with that shaded area, that's a floodway. And we'll zoom into that here in just a second. We got another picture of it. So there we go, the floodway again, right there. Now the floodway is the area that has the greatest flood velocity, but that's not what a floodway is. It contains that high velocity, but that's not what it is. In an A zone that we talked about before, and we mentioned this early on, that you can't have an unacceptable rise. And if it's more than a foot, that's unacceptable. So what they've done here is the engineers going ahead and calculate, whoops, what's that? Go back to, here we go. All right, hopefully you can see my cursor again. They calculate what would happen if we just got a bunch of dirt and we just started filling in this floodplain on both sides. What would happen if we started filling all of this in on this side? We filled all this in on this side, and maybe we filled all of this in up here. At what point would constricting this floodwater cause a 1 foot rise in the elevation of the floodplain? And when they get to that point, they stop and they say, okay, on the outside here, this is the fringe. And in the middle here, this is the floodway. Now, what that means is before, like with an A zone, just that common thing with no lines on it or anything like that, you're going to have an engineer that's going to have to determine what your development, whether it's going to cause a foot of rise or not, or how much rise it's going to cause. Well, in this flood zone, it's already done for you. You know that any development you do in the fringe isn't going to cause a foot of rise. You know, for that matter, you can fill in that whole side. It's not going to cause a foot of rise. You'd have to fill in the whole side and the other side before you would get to 1 foot. So you could pile dirt a mile high in the fringe, and it isn't going to cause a foot of rise. So you don't have to hire that engineer. Now, the downside of it is in the floodway, this area here, or this area that's left over after you fill in both sides with this encroachment, in the floodway, you can't cause any rise at all. And in Nebraska, in the floodway, you can't construct a structure for human habitation. Now, that doesn't just mean you can't build a house. It also means you can't build a weekend cabin. It also means you can't build a bunkhouse. You can't build a stables for horses that might have a bunk room in it or something like that. If it's for human habitation, it can't be in the floodway. So, you know, a business with maybe an apartment up above it can't be in the floodway. All kinds of things like that. So not only if you're in the floodway, can you not cause any rise, but you also can't have something for human habitation. Now, you say, well, if you can't cause any rise, you can't build anything at all, you know? That's not exactly true. If there was already an existing, I don't know, implement dealer or a Walmart building or something like that, it could be that they could build an addition on in, say, the eddy, you know, what they would call the shadow of this structure, and that wouldn't cause any rise. Or you can imagine putting something up on poles, that those poles aren't going to cause a rise. But, you know, that's kind of lame too, because who's going to put a business up on poles? You know, that's not going to happen. And since you can't put a house there or anything for human habitation, then you're really very limited on what you can do in the floodway. Okay. Amber, before I move forward, I don't have my chat up. Can you unmute yourself and tell me if we have any questions so far? I'm about to change directions a little bit.
I do have one question.
Okay.
If your community does not participate in the flood program, can an individual in that community still purchase flood insurance?
No. We can. I mean, you can, but an individual can't. So if the Department of Economic Development was putting some kind of structure there, or if they wanted to rent some place to put an office building or something like that, you could go ahead and insure it because you're a part of the state and the state is participating, but an individual cannot. So I know that you guys are working with HUD on that kind of stuff, and that, you know, HUD wants to avoid things in the floodplain, and they don't want people to have to purchase flood insurance in a community that's not participating. They don't even have that option. Good question. Very good question. Is that it, Amber? Nothing else popped up?
That's it so far.
Wow, I'm good, huh? Oh, and I never did tell my economic development joke, did I? So did you guys all hear economic development that they've opened up the Lego store? I hear that people are lined up for blocks just to get in. Okay, there you go. All right. Okay, so floodplain interactive maps. I know that when I talked with Tom, he said that we had to, that you guys are always required to have fermets go along with anything that's any development that you're doing, and we're going to go through that. But for right now, I'm going to break away from the slide program, And I'm going to talk to you about how to actually pull up flood maps so you can see whether your development is in the floodplain or not. So I am going to stop this share. Stop sharing. There we go. Oh my goodness. Got a full page of stuff here. And I'm going to go to my timesheet. I'm not finding the, I had something all open, just ready to show you all. No, this isn't it. This is just my reminders. Okay. Sorry, I had this all beautiful, didn't I, Amber?
You did. You'll get it.
This was all ready to go. And then somehow or other, I lost my, there we go. You guys get to see my timesheet now. Let's see if we can, here you go. Hopefully your timesheet is better than mine at this point. And I can't seem to get the share screen off the top of mine. There we go. Do you guys see water today, water tomorrow?
We do. It looks good.
Ha, super. Okay, sweet. Looks good. Hey, thanks. That's encouraging. All right, so this is DNR's webpage. You can see, just dnr.nebraska.gov. And if we scroll down to the bottom of this page, we'll see these 6 pictures, and we want, obviously, to go to floodplain management. So we'll go to floodplain management, and I'm going to show you how to get to our interactive map. But along the way, because we're going to scroll down here, floodplain management. By the way, did you see our moniker on the front page? Water today, water tomorrow. That's really good for Department of Natural Resources, but it's not very good for the floodplain management section. Water today, water tomorrow isn't what we want for a in the floodplain section anyway. What I want to show you is halfway down this page, there's this map of Nebraska. And earlier I was telling you that I would show you something that shows what our current projects are, and you can see those all highlighted here. But the thing about this map is that you can click on any of these counties. And when you click on the county, it will provide you contact information for every floodplain administrator that's in that county. So I know that we're going to be looking at Edison, which is in Furnace, right? One of these is Furnace. Thayer. I see what I'm doing wrong. Need to scroll down a little bit. There's Thayer, Knuckles, Webster. Isn't Furnace down here somewhere? Fillmore, Saline. Well, wherever Furnace is. There it is, Furnace. Thought it was one of these bottom counties. Okay, so I could click on Furnace and it would go ahead and pop up in another screen. It would pop up and show me all the floodplain administrators, including the county floodplain administrator, Edison's floodplain administrator, if they have one, and any other community. If they don't have a floodplain administrator, that's a good indication that they're not participating in the National Flood Insurance Program, because they have to have a floodplain administrator in order to participate. So anyway, that's that. You can play around with that later, but that's not kind of what we're going to, and I don't want to lose our connection. So down here we've got 6 different pictures again. This digital desk reference over here in the corner can be really helpful. If you're giving me a call and had some questions, we might go there to pull up some sort of FEMA manual or a copy of a floodplain development permit or any of that other kind of stuff that you might want to pull up. So it's all down there. But today we're going to be going to the interactive maps. Okay. So on the interactive maps, we have a bunch of really cool interactive maps that you can pull up. But we're just going to go to the very top one, the generic one. This is the one that you're going to go to, I'd say 90% of the time, but accurately, probably 100% of the time. The other ones are fun to play with, but I don't know that they really have a whole lot to do with what you guys work with. Okay, first thing that happens is this picture comes on up, and they just want you to agree to the terms. All the terms say is that you promise to give your firstborn male child as a sacrificial offering to the state of Nebraska, and that you sell your soul to Satan, I think. Okay, those were both jokes. Please understand those were both jokes. The truth is, I've never read this. I always just agreed to it. So there we go. And I wish that was a joke, but it's not. All right, so here we go. Here is the state of Nebraska, right here in the middle. And you give it a little bit of time, and then everything pops up. Now, we are going to go to Edison because I understand you guys have a project there. Did this pop up for you guys too? Okay, good. I hope not. They're contacting me and they should know. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. Close that. I do want to do that, but I want to do it later. So we're going to type in Edison, Nebraska. I'm going to put an NE there. And there it is, Edison, Nebraska. We're going to zoom into it. And there it is, Edison, Nebraska. You'll see that it has these yellow boxes, this yellow highlight up here and down here. That must be because you guys are doing a project there. And so the local floodplain administrator requested base flood elevations because, as you can see, this floodplain here, it's just an A zone. There's no elevations or anything like that. Whatever's being built has to be built a foot above the base flood elevation, and there's no base flood elevations given. I have a base flood elevation that I already had pulled up, but unfortunately, every time I go to the top of my screen, I get, there it is. Are you guys seeing, Amber, is everyone seeing that now? Do you see the base flood elevation determination?
Yes, we are.
Okay, super. All right, so this is another area. This is in Custer County. It's Broken Bow, and they have a base flood elevation whenever they have an A zone, and so they requested base flood elevations from us for this floodplain that comes up here. It looks like this part is digital, and then somewhere along the line it kind of goes to an old paper map. That's where you see those dots and stuff like that. Really hard to read the old paper maps and the like. But anyway, they wanted it for this section here, which is section 331720 West. You'll see that also right there, 331720. And so what happens is this was just this blue area on the map, and our engineers go ahead and calculate it, and they say, well, right here, the elevation of that flood water is 2,476 feet above sea level, 2,475, 2,474, 73, 71, 70, 69, etc. So if there was a project in town and it was happening right over in this area here, between 2473 and 2474, you would pick the higher of those two numbers, and that would be your base flood elevation. So the base flood elevation for something being built right here would be 2474. And in Nebraska, you always have to build your thing so the bottom floor is a foot higher than that. So they would have to build their structure so that the bottom floor was 2,475 feet above sea level. So that's what base flood determination looks like. We can probably, and if you wanted to, Amber, or is maybe Tom's on the phone too, I don't know who, but do you know, is the project you're working on, is it down here in the southern part of town or northern part of town?
That might actually be an Aaron question if he might want to answer.
Oh, who's that?
Aaron Boucher.
Oh, Aaron, yeah.
Yeah,
Aaron's
hi Chuck. It's a difficult question to answer because it's a wastewater project, and there's a new wastewater lagoons, and then there's a force main, and so it covers quite a large area. And,
Gotcha.
and really, the only part that will there's only about 530 feet that it's going to cross the floodplain of the force main. So it covers quite a distance. It's not just a one
Gotcha.
spot. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, let's pretend then that it's this lower.
Yeah, we might have to.
Yeah. All I've got to do is click on it, and this is going to open up a new page. So, so Aaron, since you're not unmuted anymore. So Amber, let me know when I click on this whether you see the new page or not. Come on now. So when I click on it, this little thing comes up here, and I click on this little arrow. I don't wait for it to stop searching. And it says right here, did you see this picture? Do you see that it says base flood determination? It's a white screen now. Amber, are we good?
Yes.
Okay, super. So it says base flood determination status. There's a valid base flood elevation for this. And we can view that base flood elevation by clicking on this little link here. And so here we go, just like the one that I showed you earlier. All of these base flood elevations going through town and base flood elevations here along the river. And so if these lagoons are being put in, say in this area right here, they're going to want to have the berms for their lagoon to be a foot higher than the base flood elevation, at least. That would be something Department of Environmental Quality would be probably talking about, or Department of Health and Human Services. I'm not sure which one handles lagoons right now, but you can see 2105, 2104. So 2105 would be the base flood elevation, and the berm for the lagoon is going to have to be at 2106, if that's where it's going to be. And again, with Aaron, with the buried pipe and stuff like that, Edison's still going to have to give you a permit for burying that pipe, but no one's going to care about a base flood elevation or anything like that. They're just going to make sure that that permit says that once that pipe's buried, that the grade is returned to its original grade. So that won't be a problem. Okay, let me see if I can get back to our map then. I did this wrong last time. Let's see, there we go. Okay, Amber, am I good? Are we back at the map then?
Yep, you're good.
All right, well, right now this yellow is just a pain for me. And I want to show you guys some of the tools that we can use anyway. Over here, hopefully you can see my cursor, but up at the top, you see these different sheets of paper, and those are the map layers. We can turn those on, and I can unclick the base flood determinations. Whoops, close that. And that gets rid of those yellow boxes. Now, of course, if you guys are doing a project, you probably want to start off looking for base flood elevations, because if it's in an A zone, you want to know if there's one that already exists. or whether you're going to have to contact the floodplain administrator for that community and have them request it, because only the floodplain administrator can request our engineers to make those and to do that work. So turning it off is kind of cool. We can go ahead and we can zoom in now. I'm going to use the little plus thing up here in the corner. It's much easier if you have a roller on your mouse. But what I really want to show you here is that with this, we can zoom real tight into a property like this structure right here. Tom was asking me about like this house, let's say. What could potentially happen is that the bank goes on ahead and says, we're looking at giving a loan for this piece of property right here, for this lot. Is this lot in the floodplain or not? Well, all of you can see, yeah, the lot is in the floodplain. But remember, the bank's only giving the loan on this house. So the determination is going to come back and say, yes, this is in the floodplain. Well, it is, but the house isn't. So HUD is probably going to look at that and say, well, we can't do any work with that because it's in the floodplain. What you could do with this is there's a thing called a letter of map amendment out as shown, or a LOMA OAS. And what happens is you give them a picture like this where you zoom in on the house. And you might want to back that up with a format. We're going to be talking about that in a second. But it shows that the house is out. You don't have to hire an engineer or a surveyor or anything like that. You can just show that this house is not in the floodplain. And they'll give you this letter that says that house is out. Now, another thing you could do, and this is something Tom and I, neither of us really knew, but the local floodplain administrator can also write a letter and say, I have made a determination that this house is not in the floodplain as shown on this aerial. And the thing is I don't know whether HUD would accept that. I know that typically banks don't accept that, but insurance agents always accept that. So if the local floodplain administrator makes that determination, an insurance agent will accept that and say, yeah, okay, well, we can write an insurance policy for this house based on the fact that it's not in the floodplain, and give you a really, really low rate for that. But the bank, it's their money. So they can say, look, we don't care whether you give us 1,000 letters. We want insurance on this house. So again, that's banks and insurance, and that I know. HUD, I don't know. So maybe that's something we need to work out in the future or something.
I can jump in.
Yeah.
Chuck, can you hear me
Thanks.
okay?
Yeah, I can, Tom. Thanks.
If it's going to require flood insurance, potentially, HUD does not allow it. So you're going to have to get a LOMA or a LOMAR, letter of map amendment, or a letter of map revision for that property. Okay. And typically, our policy in the past has been, don't do the house. Just choose a different, project. But if you had to, in this case, you would seek that letter of map revision or map amendment.
Letter of map amendment, yeah, the OAS in that case, yeah. Super. Hey, thanks, Tom. I appreciate that. Let me see. There's a couple of other things I really wanted to show you. Sometimes you'll pull up a map. Edison's not one of those areas, but sometimes you pull up a map and it's like there's two different floodplains, one on top of another. And that's because there's two different floodplains, one on top of another. And that's because there are new maps coming on out. So the new maps, they've either gone preliminary, means it's in that last, where the like I said, the concrete's poured, in which case you can shut off the preliminary one here and see what's regulatory for right now. Or you can shut off the regulatory one and see what's going to be happening in a matter of months. Either way, just look at the one that you really care about. If we're in the process of making maps, we've got new data, good data, then it's this flood awareness area. And that's probably the area you want to shut off or turn on, whichever, because that's what we're looking at potentially in the future. But that could change, probably only slightly, but it could change between now and when the map becomes preliminary or when it becomes effective. To see just the effective map, you're going to look at the effective paper map, or you're going to look at the National Flood Hazard Layer. Okay. One other area that I think is really handy for you is community boundaries. And I'm going to click on that. And I'm going to zoom out so you can see what this is. Hopefully we can see what this is. So you see here, Edison is all in yellow. I mean, you saw their jurisdiction before, so you knew where their city limits were already. But what I want to point out is that up here, Arapahoe, I'm sorry, close that. Arapahoe has adopted a 1 mile extraterritorial jurisdiction. So their jurisdiction extends beyond their city limits. So if you're doing a project out here that's outside of the city of Arapahoe, you still have to go to the Arapahoe floodplain administrator for any kind of permits because they have that 1 mile extraterritorial. So this is kind of handy to see. Addison didn't adopt a 1 mile, Arapahoe did. And so that's kind of a handy tool to use. That's our interactive map. And I am going to move on to FEMA's Map Service Center and talk about it and how to make a fermet. Tom, you want me to do that? So I've got that on there. We're gonna do that next. In the meantime, Amber, do we have anything in the chat? Any questions that I can handle before that?
We don't have any questions.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go back. All right. So I'll have this for you. It's msc.fema.gov, but typically if I'm Google searching it, I'll just type FEMA MSC, and this will be my first choice. The FEMA Flood Map Service Center. Now there are two ways for us to go on ahead and make a fermet of Edison, which is where this project's going on, right? One, we could go on ahead and we could just type in Edison, Nebraska in this blank. We could actually type a street address for Edison, Nebraska, if you're doing one of those projects like Tom was talking about. But one of the things, and so that's easy. I mean, you guys can just do that. And the fact is that, I don't know, 85% of the time, that just works, okay? But if it doesn't work, here's something else you can do. You can click on Search All Products. And when you search all products, you get this window. And of course, we know Edison's in Nebraska. So we've got to pull down here. Nebraska, bada bing. County, what did I say? Fillmore? It's not Fillmore. Somebody stop me. Is that right, or was it Furnace?
Furnace.
Furnace. Thank you. Thank you. Furnace County. And then when we click on this, there's everything in Furnace County. It could be Arapahoe, whatever. Edison's right there. We could just say Furnace all jurisdictions. If we know the community's in Furnace, but it's not popping up here, maybe it's unincorporated or something. Maybe FEMA doesn't have a record of it. We can just go all jurisdictions. Or if we know that it's out in the country somewhere and it's not in Furnace, or we know that it's not in Edison or Arapahoe, we can just go, hey, just show me the unincorporated areas. I don't want to see everything. But in this case, we're going to go to Edison. Okay, then we hit the search button down here. Is my face, is this panel showing up for you guys? No? Okay, good. I think I'm going to move that off so it's not in my way. All right, so when I go to this page showing all products, there are a lot of things that we could do. Now, Edison doesn't have too many. It's a little village, so there's not a whole lot here. But there could be, if you were looking at Dodge County, There could be several hundred things down here in historic products. That would show that maybe a house or something like that. It would show old firm maps, or it would show old letters of map amendment, or anything like that. You can look at pending projects. If there was a new project going on in the process for Edison, it would show up there. If it's gone preliminary, it's going to be there in the preliminary products. But Edison doesn't have anything like that going on. So we'll just look at the effective products. All right, so for Edison, they have 2 firm panels. They do have a flood insurance study. There is no letter of map change is what that is. LOMIC is a letter of map change. That means everything. That means letter of map amendments, letter of map revisions based on fill, all of that stuff. Edison doesn't have anything like that. 2 firm panels, and I'm telling you, I think Edison probably only has 1, but I want to talk to you about the other one first. Because in this firm panel section, the first one that always comes up is this CINDO ABC, whatever. And forgetting the C, that stands for county, what the IND stands for is index. So a lot of times you're going to be looking for a piece of property, maybe out in the country or something like that, and you'll have 100 different firms to look at. Well, we can view this index. And it's not the easiest thing in the world to use. Do you guys see the index? Amber, am I good? When I start changing pages like this, I get worried.
You're good.
Okay, super. So here, if I knew that it was, let's see, I think that's a wrap. Let me click on it because it'll get bigger if I click on it. There we go. By the way, we can zoom in on anything just by putting a box around it. And I think I'm going to have to do that because my eyesight's not that good. If I'm not seeing it, I don't think you guys are seeing it. Let's find out what, let's see, who do we have? Aaron. Aaron, do you know which one of these is, oh, here we go. It's got to be something that doesn't have a TTJ, right? Is this it? Is this Edison right here? I think it might be. Well, let's find out. I'll draw this box.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, thanks. That makes me feel better about my eyesight. Okay. Yeah, sure. I drew the little box around it, and sure enough, Village of Edison right there. And so I can find out now that, whoops. And that's a mistake right there because now we're going to, okay, I'm going to max zoom out. So right here is Edison in that box there. And this appears to be panel number 225C. It appears to be. Oh, maybe it's up here. Maybe it's that one instead, because that looks like it's for the one just below it. Doesn't really make any difference because we already know that there's only one panel that covers Edison anyway. So we're going to go back and find it. But anyway, that's how you would go ahead and find these in the future. Whoops. Okay. No, it looks like it's 100C is the one that we were looking for. So I was wrong there. Okay. And Amber, you guys all see where I'm at still, right? I didn't lose anybody?
Yep.
Okay. Super. So we've got 2 panels. One is the index. One is the panel that actually has Edison in it. We can go view there. And we'll let this load. If it takes too long, you'll have to listen to a Sven and Oli joke from me or something like that. I don't know. There we go. Hot dog. All right. So here is panel number 100. And I don't see Edison at all in here. But I'm thinking that it's down in this area, down toward the bottom. That looks like that's Arapahoe, because that looks like an ETJ line. So I'm just going to draw a box down here and zoom into the whole bottom half of this. See if I can't find Edison down there. think I see something there like a community. Yep, that's it right there. It's in the kind of the armpit of this little floodplain going through right there. All right, let me go max zoom out, and I'm going to tell you how to make a ferment. And I'll tell you why a ferment might be important. By the way, I didn't go over it with ours, but when you zoom in on a house like we did on our interactive map, you can go ahead and do the print function there, and you can print just what you're seeing, just exactly how the house is in relationship to the floodplain, really zoom in tight. But here, what FEMA wants, and probably what HUD wants, and insurance companies and whatever, is they want something more official. They want this firm. And you can't give them this firm because you would have to have a special printer that's going to print this huge map. So FEMA provides this tool called Make a Ferment. If you see where my little arrow is, my little cursor. So I click on that. And when I do, we're going to see this pink box appear and a couple of little green boxes too. There we go. What we can do is we can take this pink box and we just move it to where we want it to be. Now, Edison is right there where my little plus is. So I'm thinking that this is going to show Edison and the surrounding area. So that's going to be good for me. Now, over here, you'll see I can choose the paper size. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make a firm, a legal firm that's on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Okay, so that's why you can't change the size of this box. This box has to remain this size for it to be for it to be in scale with this firm. So that's why they have a set size box. So I'm using 8.5 by 11. If I went 8.5 by 14, I'd have a bigger box that I could use. If I went 8.5 by 17, I could have an even bigger box, but 8.5 by 11 is going to be plenty big for this. If this north arrow and scale, if it were like some funky place up here, something like that, I might want to click on that and move it around. If this thing covering the title block wasn't covering the title block, I might want to move it around. But so far, they're all pretty good as far as I'm concerned. So let's go ahead and create the ferment. I think more than likely you'll want to do as a PDF. So we'll click on that. And don't worry, I see that I've only got like 15 minutes left. I really only have about 3 minutes left. So we'll have plenty of time for questions and the like after we're done. Thanks for sticking with me. I say I only have 3 minutes left, but I suppose it depends on how long it takes it to generate this ferment, and it's not going to take long. There we go. Bing. So here we've got a nice ferment now of Edison. It shows everything. The scale here on this 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper is the same as the scale for the firm. We got the title block for the firm, so it shows which firm this is relating to and stuff like that. Tom says that they want you to go on ahead and put a box around Aaron, where you're going to be putting this lagoon, and maybe a line going through where the lagoon, where the sewage lines are going to go and everything like that. You can't do that on this program. So what you're going to have to do is just what every other surveyor and engineer in the country does. You'll print it off and you'll draw it on there with a Sharpie or with a ballpoint pen or something like that. So sorry about that. Not real technical there, but that's what you're going to do. So
can I make a comment, Chuck,
yeah,
on
go
that?
ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so don't use a balloon, don't use an X. Make sure it's very clear, the outline of the affected areas. So it's clear, and it's not just saying, well, it's approximate.
Gotcha. Okay. So I went ahead and said, save the ferment. And down here at the bottom of my screen, I don't know if you can see it or not, but it made it. And so I can open it up now. There is that ferment that we just saw a moment ago. It's all right here showing Edison and everything like that. I can go on ahead and I can print it. I could go on ahead and download it. I could do both, if I wanted to. And so there you go. That's how you'd make a ferment. Tom, was there anything more besides what you just pointed out that you wanted me to pass on to your people?
No, that's good.
Okay. If you don't remember how to do this, it's good that we went over it so you kind of have this idea. But I'm sure Tom would give you a hand, and you can always give me a call. You got my number back there, right? Okay. So I am going to stop sharing this, and I'm going to go back to my presentation. Hopefully, if everything works out well. Okay, there we go. So that's the stuff dealing with the interactive maps. I'm going to buzz through this real quick. So to get to our interactive maps, you go to our webpage, you scroll down to the bottom, you pick floodplain management, then you choose the interactive map and you choose the floodplain interactive map after you're done with that. It's going to make you agree to some things, again, things I've never read. So if you find out that it really is saying that I'm giving my firstborn male child, please let me know, because I've always just agreed to it. Give the map a minute to download, and then you can zoom into your community just by using the roller on your mouse if you want to, or you can use the plus and minus arrows, or you can go ahead and type in whatever it is you're looking to do over there in the top corner. On the Flood Map Service Center, that's msc.fema.gov. You can go on ahead and you can either type in the address or you can do search all products and type in what you need, hit search, and it should pop up with all of this with all of these different products. Okay, so you can see here, this time I pulled up Dodge County. They've got 32 different panels. So again, one of those is going to be the index for Dodge County, and then it'll have 31 panels after that. There's one flood insurance study. There are 226 letters of map amendments, letter of map revisions based on fill. So, and then these NFHL, you guys probably would know more about than I do. That's a layer that you can go ahead and download into your GIS stuff. You know, if you guys are IT people, you guys know what that means more than I do. They have 2 preliminary products. They've got a project going on right now. So they've got a couple of preliminary projects. Nothing's pending yet. And they have 151 historical maps, letters of map amendment that have been rejected as new maps came out, and all kinds of historical documents there. So that can really be handy for other places besides Edison. Okay.
Chuck,
All
can
right.
you mention one more thing? There's sometimes not a firm map available. And for instance, Brownville, high on a hill, it would have to flood most of eastern Iowa before it ever got hit. There's not going to probably be a flood map. In that case, you would use the best alternative information, maybe
Best
interviews
available.
with locals,
Right.
historical pictures, things like that.
What you could do in that sense, and we have a lot of communities, and Brownville will be mapped when they've got a mapping project going on. It's going to be, but we do have, your point is well made. There are a lot of communities that didn't get mapped. And so one thing you can do is you can contact our office and we'll give you the best available data. We'll create, like we did with that, when we did those BFE calculations, when there weren't elevations there, they'll create a map just like that, showing where the floodplain would be. But we won't just do it. We need to have your request in writing to do something like that. Okay. But we would do that. We would provide you with the best available data if you ask us. That sound good?
There's one other thing I want to mention.
Yeah.
Is if you're now in a federal disaster area from flooding in 2019, when you do your environmental review record, you want to mention, you would say something like, the recent flooding did not affect our project area, or something to that effect.
Gotcha.
So in other words, if you were not in a floodplain, but the floodwaters got you anyway, you then I guess basically you got to back up and say, should we be doing this project, even though
Right.
it's not in the flood map, but it was affected by the flood waters? Maybe take extra steps, do extra investigation at that point.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. Okay, let me see. So this is talking about making the format. And the reason that I have these here is not just to review like we're doing now, but because when you get the slide bank, then you'll actually have these instructions. So hopefully that'll help you. All right, so our office also does flood mitigation stuff. So I know that you guys are doing all sorts of economic development things. And so flood mitigation for different communities, we can help you with that too. We're on the governor's task force for disaster recovery. We administer the flood mitigation assistance grant program. That's one of 3 flood grant programs. The other 2 are administered by the Nebraska Emergency Management Agency. And we help communities, identify potential flood mitigation projects in their community. It's Adele Phillips is our mitigation person, and she would be happy to work with you guys if you're working with a community that needs to have some sort of mitigation to stay vibrant, stay robust. Here are some resources for you, and that brings us to contacts. And there I am again, Chuck Chase, flood management planner there, and I'm the outreach coordinator. So you can contact me with any of your questions. Katie would be a good person to contact with any engineering questions. When are new maps coming out for this area? We're doing this project. What can you tell me about it? Adele Phillips is that mitigation person. And again, I'm going to try and give all of this to Amber so that she can give this to you so you'll have all these contacts. And that brings me to the end